Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall. We welcome our newest addition to the Eagle family, and we're actually in Salina for our visit today at the studios of KSKG and KINA, the radio studios, as you might see in the background here. But we wanted to talk a little bit about radio and about television with our guest today, who is, I think it's safe to say, a Kansas icon, a Kansas legend.
And that's a lot of pressure.
Oh, I know it. That's what we do, is put pressure on our guests. Welcome from the Carrier Weather Service, Cathy Carrier. And boy, it's great to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Now, the reason we mentioned the newest addition to the Eagle family is because you're going to be joining, at least by voice initially, the Street Beat crew to report on the weather.
I am really looking forward to this. I'm going to be kind of bringing weather updates throughout the week and let you know what you can expect as we head through the next few days, and I'm really looking forward to that. But I think it'll just be voice. So.
Well, as we say, everybody talks about the weather, and that's exactly what we're going to do today on our Community Connection. Let me start, if I might, Cathy, by asking if I'm on track here. When you were a little girl and first learning the language, you started out with Mommy and Daddy, and the third word you said was isobars.
That's pretty close, as a matter of fact. It might have been a toss-up between isobars or maybe cold front, warm front, somewhere in there, low pressure system. I do believe those were some of my first words.
Did you literally grow up with the weather, with your famous father, Cecil?
I really did, and back in the day, Dad always did radio at home. He was on radio for almost 50, his combined weather and television spanned 50 years in Kansas. And so he was on radio forever. But because he did television late at night and he had to be up doing early morning radio, they set up a studio in our home. So I grew up with the sound of the teletype going constantly in the house, and we had a little studio, and I knew when to be quiet. Dad was on the air, and but I would sneak in there while he was broadcasting in the morning and hop up on his lap and sit there with him. And so I literally grew up with it. Weather for me was kind of like the family farm for a lot of people. I just grew up with it around, and it's all I ever knew.
And I think at one time, your dad literally had stations throughout Kansas that he reported on, as you say, voicing weather and working with the announcers at the time.
He did. We always lived in Wichita because that's where he, did television. But he did weather for stations from Dodge City and Garden City to Liberal, clear up, through the north central part of the state, and Great Bend and Salina and to Emporia, so just all around Kansas.
Well, now, when did you actually get into the weather itself? You were very close to it at the time, but when did you start getting into the weather as far as interest and developing a talent for it?
As I got older, growing up with it, I always was fascinated with it. I was the one sibling that always went with him to the television station in the summer because I couldn't go, during the school year. It was too late. But I would go with him in the summertime, and then always would walk in there and sit with him when he was doing radio. And as I got older, I became more interested. And the way that I actually fell into it was I had married and was expecting my first child, and didn't want to work outside of the house. I wanted to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. And Dad said, well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to work with me, and because you can do this, at home, and that way you don't have to work outside of the house. And so we talked about it, and I was probably about 21, I would have been about 24 at that time. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to go ahead and see, if this was something that we could do together. And Dad always had a very unique way of getting us kids to learn to do stuff, because he literally threw us in and made us sink or swim. And so one day he said, why don't you come in here while I'm doing the weather, and I'll do, all the main part of it, and then after they come back after commercial, why don't you just read the forecast? It's right there. You don't have to, think of anything, just read the forecast. And so I did, and was shaking so hard. My voice was shaking, and I did the forecast. Well, the very next day, Dad announced that, he had to go out of town for a speech, and so he had told the radio stations that I would fill in for him, and told me that you don't have a choice. I've already told them, and they need the weather, so here's what you do. You can do it. You've grown up with it. It's not a problem. And so I did, I filled in for him, and I had no choice. I felt like I had to do this. Somebody had to be there to answer the phone and do the weather. And I found out years later that he didn't really have a speech, that he and Mom just packed a suitcase and went out of town and just stayed. And, they said, well, where do you want to go in Kansas? Let's just go spend the night somewhere. And so that's how he made me do it. He knew that if I was forced to, that I would go ahead and just dive in. So that's how I started.
Trial by fire, literally.
Literally. And so from that point on, then we really started working together. And he did mornings, and I did noon and afternoon. And then when he would go out of town, I'd fill in for him. And then when I would take time off, he'd do the whole day. And so we did that for years together. And I've always cherished that because I had the opportunity to work with him. And so, not just father-daughter, but a chance to really work with him and see what he did and see what, his business was. And so that will always be very, very dear to me, that I have that memory of working with him.
And Cathy, when listening to you on KHAZ, when you were doing their reports, and also the reports on KAYS for a time, and hearing Cecil's reports prior to that, there is this folksiness, I guess, is the best way to determine it. It's really a connection to people. It's not just facts and figures, but it's a real passion for the weather, it seems like, for both of you.
Thank you. Well, that's what I learned from Dad when I started getting serious about working with him. That's when I started getting nervous about the facts and the details of the weather. And the only thing I would ask him, how should I do this? I mean, how do I present it? How do I say it? And he said, I'd give you one piece of advice for your on air, and that's be yourself. He said, and I'm not going to tell you anything else. He said, don't get on there and he said the weather is what it is, so you don't have to make anything up, you don't have to create anything. He said the facts are in front of you, and he said, but just be yourself. And I think that's the one thing that I always hear from people, even to this day, is they talk about how Dad had that calming voice, even when they knew the weather was going to get very ugly. That he was so calming and straightforward and never afraid to say, here's what we think's going to happen, but if it changes direction or if this happens, he was never afraid to say, this might be completely off base. And I think that people appreciated that because he was very, down home with him and loved people. And Dad loved Kansas and had no intention of ever leaving. He had many opportunities to go to bigger markets. When I was about 12, the NBC affiliate in Chicago had called and asked him to do weather there, and he packed us up and we drove to Chicago, and we drove around Chicago, and he said, there's no way I'm moving my family here. We grew, we were kind of out in the country, and it was Kansas, and it was, friendly people and that real connection. And he didn't even go to the TV station. He called him when we got home and said, changed my mind, I'm not going to do it. So Kansas was home, and the people of Kansas were so important to him.
Well, a busy life still, 4 children, the daily features. You're on a morning show in Wichita now on the radio?
I am. I've worked out of my home, as Dad did, on radio for the first 22 years of my career. But then the last couple of years after my youngest children were grown and off to college, then the house was, it was an empty nest. And it was kind of an unspoken thing with the radio station in Wichita that if I could stay home and get the kids raised, then I would, kind of entertain the thought of coming in. And I started going into the station about 2 weeks before the girls' graduation from high school, so they didn't give me much time, but I enjoy it now because now I get to get more involved in a lot of other things. I'm music director at the station in Wichita, and I get to work with more of the other elements of radio, which I enjoy as well. So,
what is it about the weather that fascinates you?
Well, Kansas weather, the phrase is true. If you don't like it, just wait a bit, it'll change. And I think a lot of it too is growing up with Dad and his passion for it and his interest in it, and then that just kind of, sparked me. I have lots of fond memories when I was young, sitting on the front porch when storms would roll in and sitting there with Dad, and he'd explain things to me and we would talk about it. And only if it really started bubbling up and was getting rough, and then chaos in the house. Mom was finding his suit coat, and it was out the door and back down to the television station, and probably all of that excitement, probably, sparked my interest as well. So,
and we have to talk about the technology as far as the weather goes and the changes that you've seen over the years and how that's impacted your abilities to do your job.
It's amazing, the difference. When I first started working with Dad, we literally had a teletype that just printed out the national discussions of where the fronts were, and we would sit with this acrylic board that had a map of the United States and literally plot everything on there so we could kind of see where everything was located and how it was moving. And now, of course, you can bring up all the graphics and everything's right there, and it's amazing. And the forecasting obviously has improved significantly in a lot of ways, but at the same time has lost that human element and instinct, because I talked to the guys at the National Weather Service, and it was really interesting. One time they had the opportunity to meet Dad, and this has only been probably about 10, maybe, it probably was about 15 years ago, I guess, and he was out, obviously, of the business and stuff. But to them, he was such an icon because they don't lay the big maps out and literally plot all of the fronts and plot everything like they did in Dad's day. When he was at the National Weather Service, they feed all the information into, a computer, and the models come up from that. And so they were just, so excited to meet him because in their eyes, that was the true forecasting. And I think that it does lose a little bit of that human instinct and element. And of course, Dad knew Kansas weather. He understood Kansas weather. So he sometimes would kind of, use his own judgment on that. But obviously being able to detect severe storms and tornadoes quicker, and that's a wonderful thing that we can get that information out faster to people and give them more time to react.
And is there any one significant part of this overall technology that's made the biggest impact, do you think? I'm thinking of the satellite imagery, the computer models, things like that. Any one thing that's made a bigger impact, you think, over the years?
Well, for me, I think it's definitely, the radar, the ability to see the winds, into a storm and on the other side of a storm, and being able to detect areas where you see the different winds, kind of battling one another, and the potential there for, severe storms to develop or tornadoes. And I think that has been a tremendous advancement in that respect.
And along with that, you touched on this, and I'm glad you mentioned it, the accuracy of the forecasts has really improved. I remember we used to gamble on the day-to-day forecasts, and now you can forecast out a week at a time and be very close to right on target.
Yes, it is. It's amazing. And because we are able to watch things so much closer and see storm systems so much closer and how they're moving and how they're developing, and then the flow of moisture and how much moisture is going to be affecting it. That has made a big difference. But as everybody knows, weather still is an inexact science, and we still get surprised multiple times. And so, you know, Dad still, even in his later years in doing weather, always told me, Cathy, don't get too confident 48 hours, you know, past 48 hours out. And because we still get burned quite a bit. If you truly watch those 7-day forecasts, they're tweaked about every day. So you can't go out too far yet.
And along with that, although we have the technology and the abilities to forecast the weather, we really don't have anything that yet allows us to control the weather. I mean, we're strictly at nature's whim, aren't we?
Absolutely. We have no control whatsoever, and I have to remind people of that on a daily basis when I get some, you know, some harsh words about a snowstorm that moved in, or, you know, a front that moved in and dropped the temperature 40 degrees, and we have no control whatsoever, but at least we have a better understanding of, you know, watching it move in, and a little bit more heads up of what to expect.
As we mentioned, we're in the studios in Salina of the radio stations KINA and KSKG with Cathy Carrier from the Carrier Weather Service. And as she came in the door, it was raining, and she says, you know, if I'd have been smart, I would have forecast this rain.
I tell you, I've never seen people so happy, though. It's been a long time, and we've needed this desperately, and it should stick around for a while, so we're in good shape.
I was going to ask you if we could get a forecast here as long as we're up with this. But you are going to partner with Street Beat now to do daily reports on the weather.
I am, and I am really looking forward to it. I was really excited when I got the call to see if I was interested in doing this, and I can't wait. I'm just really excited to be a part of this.
Well, it's a known factor, and certainly we'll be enjoying the forecasts on the regular editions of Street Beat with Becky Kaiser, the host, as we've enjoyed our visit today, as usual, from the Carrier Weather Service, Cathy Carrier, and our Community Connection. Once again, thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall. Thanks to you for watching Community Connection from Eagle Community Television.